Good afternoon. My name's David McKeown and I'm a postgraduate research student at Bristol Law School on the Sustainable Futures pathway. And today I'm really delighted to be joined by James Thornton, who is a lawyer, activist, writer and CEO of ClientEarth. James, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and speak with us. In the UK, I think ClientEarth is very known for its work with climate action. But alongside this, your work is also concerned with protecting forests and defending habitats. And I wondered today, what do you perceive as the main threats for those areas?
So one is climate change. So if you're going to protect biodiversity, you have to stop climate change. There are a lot of good reasons to stop climate change. And that's one of them, if you want to preserve life and the diversity of life. Another is human use of land. So agriculture is one of the largest impacts on, in Europe, for example, it's the number one thing that is having an impact on biodiversity and creating biodiversity loss. So the conversion of land and then the use of pesticides and herbicides. And that's an enormous global problem. So agriculture, and then deforestation. So deforestation sometimes involves agriculture. So in Brazil, for example, you have large areas of forest in the drier forest, the cerrado, but also the wetter forest that have been and are being cut down in order to grow soybeans. So we raise enormous numbers of animals in terrible conditions, and we cut down the rainforest to grow the soybeans to feed them. And so the whole agriculture industry is one of the main contributors. And in the end also to climate change itself. So if you want to protect biodiversity, one of the things you need to do is to address the agriculture system that we have and try and make it a much more sustainable system. So it's something that you immediately start working on and of course we work on.
That description of these different factors really demonstrates the relationality of climate issues and environmental issues in general. I wonder, for you, has it always been a holistic approach, or was there one cause that brought you into climate activism, or did you always have this sense that there was a holistic nature to this problem?
The nature of nature is
very much
holistic.
Yeah,
it's completely holistic. And like almost every environmentalist I've ever met, what happened to me is I fell in love with nature as a kid. As a kid, I spent as much time as I could out in nature, and collecting spiders, looking at flowers, watching birds. Anything I could do that would get me intimately involved with nature. And then at university and at law school, it was beginning to become clear that the human impacts were growing to the point that they were dangerous. And I had originally thought I was going to be a scientist because I just love nature. But becoming a lawyer became a way to learn tools that could be used to save nature. Rather than studying it and see it go, I would get these tools and try and protect it. So, and then as soon as you go into it, you see the connections between this part, that part, between all of it.
It's an encouraging time in many ways because I feel like people are talking, certainly post-COVID-19, a lot more about the environment in a way that maybe prior to COVID-19, I think I sensed maybe it wasn't there just in as popular a way. Particularly, I think like with lockdowns, people were getting back into nature and rediscovering it.
Then the question is, how do you protect them? Nature-based, area-based protection has to look at not only the science of what is important to protect in the area, but also the human communities who live there, and particularly in areas that are relatively wild. It will be the forest-dependent communities and the other people, the farmers and so on, who are the ones who can become the custodians of this. And then understanding their rights and protecting their rights becomes enormously important. So that one of the things that should come out of protecting nature is also protecting indigenous people. And this would be an immense boon for human rights as well as for nature.
Something that's not so explicitly mentioned within the Convention on Biological Diversity is human rights, but within like the Special Rapporteur human rights within his recent reports, like there has been mention of this connection between human rights and the Convention on Biological Diversity. And you're seeing a lot of signposts towards rights-based discourse. And yeah, I think that would be an incredible step if we could see a greater connection between human rights mechanisms and protections, and also the Convention on Biological Diversity. And I suppose that links back as well to what we were discussing earlier with the idea of holism and interconnection between nature and humans. Like this idea, when you were mentioning earlier about the critters, I was thinking of Donna Haraway's, we're all compost. I think this is very like captures the idea quite nicely, because everything from the critters that seem so insignificant to some people right the way up to much larger aspects of nature are really all quite interrelated. And the rights that we might think about as human rights only, freedom of expression and this sort of thing, are actually inherently interrelated to what we might see as just as something that we would use to conserve biodiversity.
Well, you're absolutely right. And one of the areas that we've been working in for almost, I guess, about 10 years is in forest conservation in 4 countries in Africa. We've been working to protect and enhance the rights of the forest-dependent communities. Because the current understanding by scientists, by best conservationists, is that the way to protect nature is to protect the people who protect nature. And it's obvious when you think about it, but that's not the way conservation used to go. It used to be to protect nature from people.
Yeah.
And by protecting the people in situ, who are the best place to steward the land or the various ecosystems, you have the best chance of protecting the ecosystems. So it's really inseparable, the human rights from protecting nature. And what you need to do then is to become an expert. It's helpful being lawyers, because you need to become expert in what those very complicated rights are. Some of them very ancient customs that were never written down for indigenous communities, and that's overlaid with colonial law, with more modern law. So there's you kind of get an archaeology of rights in an area. And what will need to happen for this area-based conservation that comes out of the Convention on Biological Diversity, there's a lot of focus on clarifying those rights and making it clear that these people actually have rights there. And ideally, one of the things we'd like to see is a centralized, in various places, centralized system annotating those rights so that they're easier to protect.
It's a difficult thing, because you've got such plural systems even within a small geographical area, and then also you've got these decolonial paradigms at play as well, and it is very hard to unpack. But the complexity of it, I think, once it's embraced, can actually produce ways and pathways of dealing with this. And I think for me, one of the most important ones is participatory rights. It's so often overlooked, but they can be so fundamental in especially types of governance, to try and just set sort of a framework in place where people can participate and see what can potentially flourish out of that.
And these big cycles that we're talking about now really are the way to think. And what's encouraging is that I think a lot of people are beginning to see the big cycles and interconnection of all of these things, which gives many people a moment of despair. But what it also means is, if you go through that despair and realize that the actions you can take are improving actions, you also then feel self-empowered. So if everything is connected and I'm doing something that helps part of it, I'm doing something that also helps the whole thing.